Salut! This video is part of a new series on which I'll be talking about creating and managing a successful Gite and Airbnb business in France. It's for you if you plan to buy and rent a holiday home in France, but you might stay in your own country, or if you plan to move to France and actually buying this Gite or Airbnb property to run a full business and come on a business visa. Part of this video is shared on YouTube, and some of the more juicy bits will be kept for my new course called Create a Gite and Airbnb Business in France. I will add the description below the video so you can have a look. Today, we are talking to Katie Bellamy, who recently bought a Gite complex in Dordogne with her husband Steve. And I'm going to share a few pictures with you as I start describing her project. Katie Bellamy and Steve decided to move to France in 2024. They bought a Gite complex called Cours de Fleuve in Dordogne, and I call it a Gite complex because there's 4 Gites. You can actually see them. Katie will confirm in a moment. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 Gites, 2 pools, and it has a total capacity of 16 guests at a time. The property is located in Dordogne. You can see why, because you've got a beautiful fleuve in the background, which I believe is Dordogne, but we'll confirm this in a moment. This property was actually run as a gîte before by the previous owners and was in a good condition when Katie and Steve bought it. Today, Katie is going to be sharing her experience and her journey with us. We'll be covering 5 key topics, which is choosing an area in France and buying a property, applying for a business visa, registering a business, getting the Gîte classified with Atout France, and also settling down in France. I'm not sure Katie has had time to do much of that yet, but hopefully she'll be able to give a bit of information on this as well. And for those who don't know me, I'm Valerie Aston, and I help expatriates prepare, create, and manage their first business in France. So I'm going to invite Katie to join us now. Hi, Katie. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today about your experience. Could you introduce yourself a bit more? Tell us about you and Steve and why you decided to come to France.
I was originally a cognitive neuroscientist back in the UK, and my husband Steve was a builder. Both of us wanted to semi-retire, but I didn't want to give up completely. And we decided to choose France for a variety of reasons. First one being Steve's family had a chalet in the Alps where they used to go skiing every year. So he already spoke French and was very fond of the country. I'd been over here either on business or on holidays, but Steve suggested we have a holiday in the Dordogne. And I must admit, it was love at first sight. We took one look at the river and said, I'm home, this is where I want to live. And so we decided there and then that that was going to be our new home.
So you confirmed that what I was saying earlier when I was showing the property, the river in the background is Dordogne.
Yes.
What a sight, what a sight. So
we're so lucky because we have views down to the river, and even on cold winter mornings when the mist is coming up from the river, it is just stunning.
So Steve already knew the area. When you said Dordogne, he already knew the area. He said, okay, that's the area where I want to live. How did you go about buying a property? I mean, you knew the area, but did you still have a couple of scouting trips to say, let's visit loads of properties around there?
We had a very specific idea of what we wanted. We knew it had to be in the location of the town Lalande, 10 minutes away. We were so specific that we knew it was going to be difficult to find a property. I do recommend for anybody who perhaps doesn't know the area very well, do come out, get in contact with local estate agents. But we eventually just knew that this was the area that we wanted to be in. Our next step is finding the right property. We didn't do scouting trips. One that I'll say is very good for people is greenacres.fr. And this means that you select the area that you want to look in, and it has multiple estate agents and also private sellers. It's a good way of actually looking at the area and seeing what the average prices are and what you can afford. So we use Green Acres. But actually this property, although it was on estate agent, we actually saw its private listing on Green Acres and we contacted the owners directly.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that website. As you say, one tricky thing in France, you've got loads of independent agents, but you have to go on every single
Yeah,
site, every single notaire. So to have this site when it's concentrated is a nice way of seeing it, especially if you can see the property price.
yeah.
So you had a very clear idea of the criteria and what you wanted. I mean, the property is definitely in a mint condition. Is that part of the criteria you had set?
To do this as a business for me, it would have to be obviously more than 2 or 3 sheets. So first off, we wanted fairly good condition. We didn't want to do a huge renovation project again. And the second thing, and this makes me sound really high maintenance, was I wanted my own pool.
I don't know if you can tell us which one it is. It must be the one that's covered.
I don't.
Not the cover.
Mine's actually the smaller one, but
This
it
one.
is being built next year.
I share a few pictures as you're talking to say it is in a very good condition. The thing looks very nice.
So it is hard because if you have very specific criteria and looking for renovation projects, one of the things that was important to us was that the main house had a private area. This is actually the main Gite swimming pool. It's actually quite big. It's 12 by 6 meters, so it's a big.
And you showed up earlier as we were talking. You said you had 50 lanes there on Sunday.
Yeah, I did 50 lanes in there on Sunday.
That's the nice part of being the Gite owner.
Criteria was specific. We knew it was going to be difficult to find a property in this region because it's very popular. So we were looking for something which had a good track record, a good year of Gite rental, but also somewhere that gave us our own private space and my own lovely swimming pool.
So how long did it take you to find this property?
Well, we decided on the idea to move. Gosh, this must have been back in January 2022, and we looked and just couldn't find it anywhere. We'd come over here a couple of times, but we'd got to the point where we were about to put our house up for sale in the Cotswolds, and we just couldn't find anywhere. So we decided to make a trip to Spain, to Valencia, because by some quirk, I'm eligible for Spanish citizenship after 2 years residency. And would you believe it? The week before we left, Steve spotted this property, but we thought we're going to Valencia anyway, so let's go. But I was a bit sort of gutted, really, because I still wasn't sure if this was the right property. But we got to Valencia and I sat down and I said, I love Spain, I speak Spanish, but I don't want to live here. I love France.
Change of plans, let's move on.
He's like, annoying woman. So as soon as we got back, he drove over here to France to look around Cour de Fleuve with the owner, Anne. And he was around carrying his iPhone.
You saw it from the phone for the first time, right?
Yeah, I didn't see the property until we bought it. So we went round and Anne was really helpful, and Steve got back to the place he was staying and he said, what do you think? I said, put in an offer, that's our house. And we've just kept, we were so lucky that I just think this was meant to be. This doesn't happen to everybody, trust me. Most of the properties you see in France, particularly if you're coming from England, the first thing that will horrify you is French rural kitchens. Just don't go there. You're going to need to rip them out. Bathrooms was another issue, but this place has done beautifully. It fitted our criteria. It was at the highest end of our budget, but it was worth spending the money on because there wasn't anything else left to do. Yeah. It was a case of get here. Yes, there's some renovation work we need. Yes, we need to put solar panels up, and I need a bigger swimming pool. But these weren't necessities.
In your situation, it was best to put a higher budget, but to get something that was ready to work with. It's more like personalizing it or improving it.
I mean, if you want to do a renovation project, do it. But I would always advise people to be very careful with your budget, because one of the things we found, and Steve's a builder, is he is really shocked at the price of building materials and even paint in France. We got a shock with that. We want to go and buy a tub of paint. It was 3 times what you'd pay in the UK.
Prices is lower, but restoration work can be much higher, especially if you look at some of the older properties. Like, for instance, in my house, one of the walls was 1 meter thick. You have proper builders, and it's costly because they're old buildings and there's a lot of work involved. So you found this property and you bought it directly on your phone. That's good. The next step is, you mentioned Steve was going to retire, but you wanted to run a business. So you had to go and apply for a business visa. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Which visa did you go for and why?
I'm on a business visa because I'm working in France, but Steve is on a visitor long stay visa. He can't work in France because he still goes back to the UK to work for his family's company. So he's on stay visa, but we're both long-term residents. Now, as for preparing for the business visa, I would say if you want to come over on a long visa, you can pretty much do it on your own. If you are going to come to France on a business visa, you are going to need somebody like Valerie. Do not try and apply for a business visa on your own. And for that is there are a lot of so-called, should we call them internet experts and visa experts on the internet who all say, oh, I did this and I did that. Here's the thing, every business visa application is unique. You must seek advice. And in fact, it does mean that it's far more likely to be approved if you have sought professional advice for your business visa. The first thing we did was, once we'd bought the property, we started a course with Valerie, which is your business visa in France. And I do highly recommend that people do that. It's a really good move.
I didn't pay you to say this.
No, no, you wait till I charge you for the Gite.
Yes, fair enough. So you went for the business visa, so you went for visa profession libérale. I think when you applied, because the first time we started talking was end of 2024, you were at that time when the law started to change in France for Gite. So I say if you get advice or if you look for advice on online, yeah, things change in 2024, 2025, and this is going to keep on changing. We'll talk about it a bit further, but it's more complex to get a business visa because in France we tend to consider a Gite is a secondary top-up income. Therefore, if you don't present your project in the right way, they say that's not enough income, that's not a business, rejected. So in your case, it was fairly easy to say it was a full-time job because you've got those 4 Gites with 16 people, so it takes a lot of work. But sometimes I see people coming with just 1 Gite or 2 Gites, and we say that's too short. You need to add extra activities because that won't fly. You need to have retreats or activities, so it is seen as a full business. Tell us about your process, what you went through, or how you prepared for the business visa.
In hindsight, the first thing I should have done was got the doctor to prescribe me Valium. Because I said by the end of it, this was more stressful than the exams for my PhD. It is so complex. The first thing we did is with Valerie, we began to form what my business plan was going to be. That includes doing things like the financial forecast for the next 3 years. You're also going to need to do marketing work. So, you know, if you want to set up a Gite business, that's fine. But look in the area and see who else has got Gites, because loads of Gites around you, and you go to the mayor house to register your Gite, but he or she says no, because there's too many Gites in the area. That's the end of your Gite business.
Yeah, that's the first step from 2024. We had the Loi Le Maire from the name of a deputy. There's an increased number of Airbnbs and Gite in France, specifically Airbnbs, more competition, and meaning also that mayor, local authorities starting to say, okay, we have a lodging crisis where there's not enough housing for people working locally. And the government decided to give more power to the mayor to decide when a property can be switched from a private property to a holiday rental. So you have the power to say yay or nay. And if you buy a property, if you put an offer without checking first with the mairie that they will allow you to actually declare the property, and it's called déclaration de meublé touristique. If you have the coup de cœur for a property, ask your agent to check with the mairie, will we be able to run the Gite from the property? Because if they say no, full stop, you don't put an offer through, you look for the next property. If the mairie says yes, you'll have the approval, or the owner had it before, that's fine. But already since last year, there's some towns in France, for instance, La Rochelle, Nice, Paris, where they said, okay, we're going to cut down on those authorizations because there's just too many people. So that's the first thing. I mean, for you, it was run as a Gite, so that was okay because basically we knew from the previous owner that it could be run as a Gite.
But even so, Valerie, just to make this clear, check before you buy the property you are going to get the mayor to register the Gite. And in fact, it's important to us considering the amount of money we were spending. Our local mayor's office, they actually wrote an email saying, yes, they would be very happy to register the Gites. And we actually had that put into the purchase contract of the property. And I also submitted an email with my business plan when I was applying for the visa. So really get that. There is a lot of money down the drain.
Exactly. And the people at the embassy, that's the first thing they're going to check as well. They're going to say, okay, do you have the approval? Because we're not going to give you a business visa. So that's the first admin step that you had to go. So then you prepared your dossier and then you submitted it. If I just show one slide, just show if you go for business visa, so you prepare your dossier. And that bit, you say, oh yeah, that's easy, business plan. Sometimes it takes a couple of months because you work on so many things, including your strategy, your marketing, and so on. You prepare your France visa application, but you leave it on draft. And that's the key thing that Katie was talking about, submitting your project for approval to ANF, Ministère de l'Intérieur. And sometimes it can take 2 weeks, sometimes it can take 8 weeks. So when you buy the property, you sign the compromis de vente, and before the act of the vente, you have 3 months. You can already start working on this because that might take 2 to 8 weeks. Then you have the appointment with TLS. We'll talk about this in a moment, when you give your dossier, and hopefully at the end they give you the visa. So you submitted your dossier. How long did it take? Did they ask for extra questions?
In fact, if you remember, the first bit was trying to get onto the website to start with. The only thing I can say, you need to be very patient and drink a lot of wine before you try this. The tips that I've learned is, if you're a Mac user, do not use your Safari browser to log into ANF. You're going to need to use Google Chrome. Some people have said Firefox is the one that works the best, but I don't know how many people use Firefox anymore. So you sign into the ANF to do the bit, which is to submit your business plan. It took us 6 attempts before we finally got in, and it didn't help that towards the end of it, I didn't realise at the time I was actually falling quite ill. I was really angry and frustrated because by this point we were in France completing the house sale. There was loads of other things going on, but we submitted it, and I must be incredibly lucky because within 2 weeks it came back approved.
Yeah, but your dossier was spot on. It was like,
yeah,
perfect. I mean, as you said, the website is so clunky, and when you get to submit your project to ANF, or someone who goes for the visa talent or booking your TLS appointment, there's a lot of frustration. You want to free your morning or your afternoon because you keep going back. It's clunky, doesn't work, so it's not much fun.
The big difficulty is as well, I know there is like a consumer company, they've picked up this problem with this website, not just with visas, but with also doing your renewals. And part of the problem is that there is no way you can contact anyone in person, by phone, by email, if you run into a problem with the website. There is just contact. And this is partly because they have moved everything away from the prefectures to try and do everything online. So I'm just going to say to anybody going through this at the moment, my prayers are with you. Just keep trying.
It's feasible. You just need patience. It's just some of the tasks you do, okay, I'm going to have to be super patient for this. I say, as long as you've prepared your dossier well, it can be fast. If you're not in one of the key seasons, for instance, because May, we've got so many bank holidays, or August, December, you might wait longer, but otherwise it can be fast sometimes. So you have the submitted your dossier, you get the approval from ANF, so it's like moving to the next step. You went to that TLS appointment. So how did the TLS meeting go?
Make sure you have had your business plan validated, because the TLS appointment's quite difficult to move. You can move it, but the problem is you'll lose money each time. So this December, so we booked our TLS appointment in Manchester in the UK for January, which meant we had to return to the UK. From this point onwards, things moved quite quickly, except for one disaster, which was driving up to Manchester and chose to start snowing. And I mean, it shut it down. Because if you're late for your TLS appointments, so make sure you leave time to get to the TLS.
Yeah, so TLS, they're quite efficient. I mean, I know in the US, they've replaced the other body VLS because they weren't efficient, but TLS is super efficient. So usually that part, for some people, is quite disappointing because you kind of expect a meeting when you ask about your business and talk a bit of French, and they don't care. It's just, give me the business plan. There you go. Give me the financial plan. There you go. Give me the attestation. So it's a bit of a letdown of there's no major thing happening. And then within 2 weeks, you get your passport back with your visa in, and you say, "Yeah, one bottle of champagne."
So the TLS appointment itself is a bit weird. I think I described it going through the most advanced self-service checkout till at the
All right.
supermarket. Like you said, we were expecting we'd be taken into a room and they'd talk to us, but it was nothing like that. So when you arrive, you'll go through a little security and basically your visa number will come up on a screen. And once it's the top, you essentially go to the next available till.
Oh,
There'll be a gentleman there and they will go through. You really do need to prepare for this. Make sure you've got documents, the originals, and this is for each person, remember, because everybody's visa is separate. So both of you must have a folder with your original documents in it and a second one with the copies that the TLS centre will take. Some said actually they've turned up with the originals and the TLS have copied those. But it was really busy, even in January when we got to the one in Manchester. So they actually took all my copies of all my photocopied originals. There was another interesting point as well, was that the lady behind the counter had never seen a business visa application
really? I
before.
mean,
So whereas my husband's file was this thick, mine was this huge folder. And she looked at it and she said, I don't know what to do. And she called over the French manager who looked at it and said, no, that is correct what she's asking to submit. Because the woman can submit this. And I said, I do need to submit it. Just remember that what you have told by TLS to submit is right. Stand your ground, okay? Make them take.
Yeah, that's a very good
And
point
then,
because it's very often a bit less with TLS, but the person you're talking to is not aware of anything. So if you know you have to give those, they say, no, I want you to take them. If you don't take the validation from NF, you're in trouble after. So you want to make sure they do take everything.
Yeah, so make sure of that. And then the next stage is you'll be sent to sit somewhere else for an hour and taken into a small room, small cubicle where you'll have your biometrics done. So this is where they do your biometric or fingerprints. Once that was done, it was all pretty quick. You have to provide recent passport photographs. And would you, Adam and Eve, that was the one thing. Ours were both 1 week out of date.
1 week out of
so,
date.
yeah. So we had to go and have our photographs done at the centre. But again, that was all organised. And don't forget, you will have to pay for your photographs. Some centres only take cash. Make sure you've got 15, 20 quid on you. You will have to pay for the application while you're there at the TLS centre, and they only accept debit or credit cards. Once it was dusted, it must have taken an hour, maybe an hour and a half. We were out of centre and we were on our way home, and it was all a bit of an anticlimax, really.
All that work for that.
Yeah. I mean, the worst bit was handing my passport over. I was like, where's I going to see
That's a
that
tough
again?
one to do. So that's really interesting to have your description about that, how that went, because so many people have expectations. Oh, I've got to brush up my French for this meeting, and be able to talk about business activity, and it's just a bit, as you say, a bit of a letdown. So you've gone through that loop, you got the visa added to your passport, and then you move back to France, and then we went on to the next step, which was to actually create your business. How long after arriving to France did you register your business? Did you before? I think we might have done it before you moved, since you already own the property.
So again, not everybody has to do this, but hi, Valerie, because you're really going to have a lot going on in your plate. We were very lucky in that our visas came through, I think 10 days after we left the TLS centre, so we were ready to go. But we were incredibly busy. And you've just got other things on your mind other than trying to register a business. So I asked Valerie to register the business for me. What that meant was we could time it so that as soon as my visa began, I'd ask for a start date right at the beginning of February. Even though we came back in January, it meant that I could coincide the business registration with my visa start date, which meant I was up and running in February and ready to go, and all the paperwork had been sorted out. You can do it on your own, but I'll be honest, if they put bureaucracy in the Olympics, the French are going to win every gold medal, okay?
Yeah.
You are going to need help. Even if you speak French fluently, you are
Yeah.
going to need help with your business registration. You're going to have other things going on. Get Valerie to do your business registration for you, okay?
As we say, there's so many things to do, and because it's activité commerciale, there's loads of legal documents that we have to submit. If you're a consultant, that's quite easy, but if you actually have a gîte, there's loads of proof that
Yeah,
you have to submit. And as you say, behind INPI, the body handling registration, is the tribunal. The tribunal is super picky about what they want. If the dates don't match, it's not the right description. There
yeah,
can be a nightmare depending on where you live. In some areas of France, they're just a nightmare. So you have to be very specific. What was interesting is in your case, because you own the property, we have the address and you've got a starting date for the visa, we can plan ahead, as you say, so that when we register with the matching date of the visa issue,
yeah,
so that when you land, the paperwork is here and you can start rolling and focus on other things. So you went for a micro entrepreneur business. I think you
yeah.
must have had your papers within a few days or a week.
Yeah, it took less than a week to get everything through.
As a micro entrepreneur, how is it going? I mean, you're just starting the season. How has the first 4 months in business been? Loads of paperwork landing your way.
I'll explain why I look so tired. Basically, the reason I chose micro is yes, it's the simplest system. No, it's probably the most efficient in terms of my expenses. But again, my theory was keep everything as simple as possible. Now, I was incredibly lucky because these sheets have been here for donkey's years. The previous owner had already got me bookings for this year. So, in terms of starting a business, I already had customers. Not everybody is going to be that lucky. You really need to be thinking well in advance with your advertising. Where are you going to go and advertise? The first 4 weeks were very much preparing the sheets to have them classified for their star rating. So it was a bit hectic because, as we'll explain in a bit, it's quite precise classification. And to top it all, we were just trying to get our heads around things like, why is this wire connected to this pump, not actually connected to any?
That's
So
it.
just things like that, I mean, it took us 2 weeks to figure out how to switch the cooker on. The first sort of few months of your business, you're also just trying to come to terms with a completely, new system of
Yeah.
living here.
And the business itself, the property, getting the business
Yeah,
up and running. So, I mean, to me, when I think of you, it feels like a roller coaster because there's so many things. You prepare for
yeah,
the visa, you buy the house, you prepare for the visa, you move, you go for the Atout France qualification, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and you have to prepare the summer season. So it's like bumper after bumper. It's like you adding them up and thinking,
yeah,
wow, when is she going to rest? Because the timing is such that by the time you arrive, and it was February, March, you prepare for the season, you get your qualification, and now the guests are arriving, so you fall into June, July, August, September, which are going to be pretty busy. As we said, you went for micro entrepreneur, and as we talk about people who might go for Gite or Gite complex or chateau, most of the time we kind of balance between maybe a micro entrepreneur or maybe a French incorporated business like a SAR or an EARL. And it very much depends on the state of the property, because in your case, the property is in a mint condition, therefore there's not much restoration. So it doesn't matter so much to start as a micro entrepreneur because you could always switch to another business type later on whenever you're ready. One key point I want to make, and which is leading us to our next subject about the Atout France, is that in France has started the key changes that happened in 2024, where you had the Loi Le Mer, which kind of shuffled the rules to say there's too many Airbnbs, not enough properties for rentals. There was also a change in the law with a budget to change a regime called the LMNP, which is non-professional gîtes. And before you could have a high turnover with a micro entrepreneur as well. And what they said is, okay, we're going to shift that regime, we're going to change it. We're going to say that now for micro entrepreneurs, before they were considered as buy to resell, so you had a very high turnover, about 180,000 euros. So it wasn't like a shop or e-commerce. They said, no, that's not a shop, it's a service. Let's shift it back to service. We're going to cap your turnover at 77,000 euros. So it doesn't work for all properties. So we know 77,000 euros is the max. However, there was another rule added to this to say, okay, that turnover is even lower. And we're talking about turnover, that's bookings cashed in. We can say, okay, we're going to lower it down to 15,000. So basically, if your Gite or Airbnb is not classified with a body called Atout France, your turnover is limited to 15,000 euros, 1 5. So the pressure I put on Katie on top of whatever she had, I said, okay, Katie, as soon as you got the Gite registered, top of your list is to get in touch with Atout France to make sure your Gite get classified with Atout France, so that then we can lift that turnover. We shift it up to 77,000 euros. And in the business visa application, we also mentioned this. So you can still go for micro entrepreneur, but it needs to be validated. If you don't want to be capped, you go for an incorporated business or another one called Réel Simplifié, but I don't recommend it to a new expat because the nightmare stories you hear about is sole trader Réel Simplifié. So as you can see from Katie, you got plenty to deal with. Katie, tell us a bit more about you landed, you kind of putting your furniture around, or the Gîte. Some of it was already furnished, but you had to bring all your own personal things. How did that process happen with Atout France? So it's basically getting someone to come and check the property and rank it and give you a ranking.
Yeah, okay. She had to be classified. You get a nice little tax handout of 50%. So there's that side of it. But it's important to me because I think having been in the UK and you go to so-called star-rated hotels and B&Bs, you're never quite sure what you're getting. It's different in France. The classification system is national. Every company that does classification must follow the same criteria. The first thing you have to do is find one of the certified companies who are allowed to come out and do classification. But if you're not sure, to your local tourist office and ask them, because a lot of tourist offices have their own classification people who can come out. If you're still not sure who you want to choose, go on a lot of the Gîte owners forums and you just say, who did you get classified with? You'll start to see certain companies' names come up. And so from that, I eventually choose a company called 2B&G Qualité. And I actually applied to them even before we bought the property. So I actually did this back in November. I contacted B&G Qualité. All of them have information boxes where you put in your details about your Gîtes and they can then give you a quote. It's going to cost you about 250 to 300 euros plus TVA to have each Gîte classified. Please book in advance. The great thing about making sure you're booking in advance means set the date for when the Gîte inspector came out. So I chose the end of March.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point because the law was passed in December, where basically suddenly everybody woke up and said, oh, right, now it's happening, let's make it happen. Because last year was in between. I mean, what happened? We're giving you leeway. They said, no, that's it now. It's applicable. And people who were already in business with the Gîte had to catch up. And the key thing is that, as you mentioned, there were several advantages. First of all is that at least the one I mentioned is your turnover goes to 77,000 euros rather than 15. So you can imagine someone who had a business doing 16, suddenly, oh, right, I've missed it. Now I'm on 15. That's a big trouble. The second thing you mentioned is that you have lower social charges. So as a Gîte, as a micro entrepreneur, normally you pay 12.3% of social charges. Once you get the classification from Atout France, you go down to 6%. You just have to tell the URSSAF, show you at the station. So you go down by half.
And I just add to the bit with URSSAF though, I have informed them, never heard anything back, and I'm still on the wrong
track. You have to push this on because I had customers in the past who had to keep telling them several times, I'm on the lower bracket. And even though they might have passed it once, next quarter it was again at the wrong rate. So it's chasing all the time.
Tell them I'm sending Valerie round.
Exactly. And the third thing, which is also useful, is as a micro entrepreneur to assess your income. We look at your turnover. The tax office applies a standard rebate, and Katie mentioned if you don't get classified, they do a rebate of 30%. They assume that 70% of your turnover is your business income. While if you get classified with Atout France, they apply a rebate of 50%. So it means less taxes. And I did put the pressure on you on this. Katie, go for this. And what was funny, I was thinking tax. I said, no, Valerie, it's all about customer service and providing the highest qualification.
Yeah, sorry, I've got the hang of the tax bit now.
But it is good because, as you say as well, there's definitely more competition in terms of Gîte properties. And it's quite a while ago, I was talking to Rupert Springfield from the Gîte Guru, and we were talking about classification. And usually if you look in your area, so far, I think that's going to change in 2025, but there aren't that many Gîtes that are classified with 4 or 5 stars. So if you get the higher level ranking, that's also a marketing tool to say, okay, the level of quality in this, Gite is much higher than elsewhere. So it's also a marketing tool in that respect.
So the process itself, once it gets going, is quite easy. But the first thing you will get from the company that you've chosen to classify you is the criteria table. When you see it, it looks scary. And I can honestly say it's the most frightening thing I've ever done, to start counting cutlery and plates in your sleep. Because for each star rating, there is a certain criteria that you either have to meet, is not applicable, or it's flexible. And this is where it's really confusing, because you're trying to top the numbers yourself, but you don't know how many numbers are going to give you what star rating. So always go for higher than you think. But having said that, 3 stars is a good rating. It's a good standard of Gite. And that's what most of the Gites are, particularly around here in Dordogne. You don't have to go any higher than that. There are lots of things that you're going to have to take into consideration. For example, I've seen, particularly on TV programs, some Gite owners going out and buying their frou-frou-y patterned plates. Don't. Huge mistake. Because if a guest breaks one of those plates and you have to go back and replace it ready for your next classification, guess what? The company doesn't make that more, which means you're going to have to replace the entire plates. And that's because all plates have to be matching. So my biggest piece of advice I can give to Gite owners is really the only way you can go.
Or you buy a big stock in your spare room. You've got a stash of plates for
Yeah.
your 4 Gites, so you always have enough.
Yeah, well, I was lucky because one of my friends, he's a Gite owner, she closed one of her Gites down and rang up and said, I've got low plate. This is another thing. I had no idea what a French soup plate was.
Oh, yeah.
And eventually I had to go back to the classification lady, and the people at the classification companies are there to help you. If you've got questions, email them. They're brilliant. She went out and she took a photograph of a soup plate and he me and went, this is a soup plate. When I haven't got that. Luckily, Shona had loads of them, so my soup plates are everywhere now. It's going to have to be quite precise, and don't think that you can skimp on things, because D-Day comes, there's a knock at the door, and it's an inspector calling.
Yeah, when you shared that sheet with me, it's the worst Excel sheet you've seen. It's Excel on hormones and 130 criteria with 5 different cells for each of them. But at least you can go through and say, okay, that's important to them. You try to do your best to prepare, but you didn't have that much time. So you went through all the Gite and added a few touches to make it even better. And you said when the lady came around, she was saying that in the bathroom, the mirror was wrong. It had to be a floor length mirror. So you couldn't get the highest ranking because it wasn't the floor length mirror.
So this is the thing. She was lovely. She explained that she didn't need me to come around with her, and they generally don't. They don't want you off shoulder. But they can miss things. And as she'd gone round the Gites, she came back and she'd already said to me what she thought the Gites were. She said, gosh, this place is just beautiful. But I was about to lose a star rating because I had missed that there were full-length mirrors of the Gites. And she'd said they had to be in the bathroom. And I said, but because some of my bathrooms are quite small, if I put that in the room, I'd lose the heated towel rail. And she went, oh, you've got heated rails. And she'd missed those as well. So you will get feedback. And if there is anything that you don't agree with, just say, well, no, actually, I don't agree with that because, and then show them what you've got. But it was very pernickety. For example, although it wasn't necessary, my mattresses were 10 centimetres too short. They're not there to try and stop you from getting stars. I mean, from start to finish, everyone at 2B&G Quality was so helpful. Finally, when you've come to the end of the inspection, it'll take the inspector about an hour to do it, so give them plenty of time.
That's quite quick, and now our Gite is coming through.
Nowadays, they've got things like laser measuring tapes that go around quite quickly. They will test every single mattress, so don't get away with your cheapy mattresses. They will test everything. And one of the things I asked at the end was, what can I do in the future to ensure that I maintain my star rating? Is there anything you would like me to do differently? So, for example, I'd put those individual bottles of things, shampoo. Actually, B&G Quality don't like that. Now, 2B&G Quality prefer a big refill refillable bottle of shampoos and shower gels, and that's for environmental reasons. And
Right.
it's partly, as I said, I am trying to be as friendly as possible. So they're there to help. All right. It sounds like it's a really scary day, and it is. You'll
But it
love it
was
on the
scary because I remember you were so busy, you just had moved, and then you had to start preparing for this, and it's just times four because you have the four properties to look at. Having just taken over and knowing it's key, you want it done, but at the same time, you're going as fast as you can, trying to make as best as you can. And I guess you might be a bit competitive, say, right, I'm aiming for the top ranking. So tell us, did you pass the classification and how many stars did you get?
Wait. Are we ready?
Yes, we are.
Dun, 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 dun.
Woo! That's what it looks like. Show us the plaque again, because you say all this for that you can put on your property. Full
Yeah,
star.
now can I
Wow,
make it very
amazing.
clear? There's a lot of people, you'll see these TV programs called A New Life in the Sun, where on the day the classification people will come in and hand them the plaque. That's for TV people, okay? Does not happen.
You get it in the post.
Yeah. So basically, that doesn't happen. So she enters everything onto the grid system. And unfortunately for us, the day before she came, they had updated the software and it wouldn't work.
All right.
She actually couldn't say anything. She couldn't say it was 3 or 4
Right.
stars because of the software system. But she said to me when she arrived, this is 4 stars. It has to be 4 stars. But she had to go back to the office in the end and wrangle with her new software. A lot of the inspection people have to go back and they have to confirm with the area manager, and it's the managers who issue the certificates. And of course, this was Murphy's Law at place. Her boss went on holiday for 2 weeks.
No.
Anyway, she rang him up and said, look, this poor woman's been waiting. Bless him, he signed it and sent it to the post while he was on
I didn't.
holiday.
Oh, right. Nice of them.
Yeah, I actually got it through email. And how you use plaques, so this wonderful little plaque here, is you'll be sent an email along with your classification form, so the results of the classification. And the link is secure and it allows you to go. And this is another thing, you have to buy your plaques, all right?
Oh, extra money. How much does it cost?
Can't remember now. I think it wasn't cheap. I think it was 80 euros or something. Some companies do include that in the price, but obviously mine wasn't, so I had to pay for it. And the irony is, at the moment, we've got nowhere to put it.
You have to decide where you place it. But I saw on the plaque it says 5
This
years.
actually comes to bed with me.
Yeah, keep it by your bed table. But it says 5 years. The accreditation is for 5 years.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Your accreditation has to be done in 5 years' time. There's actually quite a narrow time limit as to when it can be renewed. So I would book in advance in your calendar and say 6 months before the end, you must be booking for your next classification. You can ask to have the Gites classified earlier. So, for example, if you've had major upgrade work done in the meantime and you feel that, say, your 2-star Gite is now 3 stars, after 3 years, you can go back to the company or to a different one and explain why and say, I now think I've moved up a star rating. So you can have them re-rated, but it gets a bit expensive.
When you say your neighbor missed the gap to get them coming, what do you mean by they missed the gap or they were too late for the season?
What happened was my friend who owns the Gite, she didn't realise that this law changed, and the earliest that the Perigord tourism people could come out was something like 2 months after her classification had expired.
Oh, right. What do you mean?
It meant she would lose her tax credit. So she knew she was in a panic. So she spoke to me and I actually sent you a Tour de France accredited company list. So you have to be careful, make sure you don't go out of your
You keep on
classification.
top of your classification. One key thing to remind people who are watching is actually don't get confused with being classified as meublé tourisme with the mairie, which is just to check that the mairie will allow you to rent your property as a holiday let, to being classified with Atout France, which is completely different. It's a private company to validate the quality of your accommodation, and that's two things. Some people say, oh, it's okay, I'm classified with the mairie. Yeah, but that doesn't open up at all any of the tax credit that we've mentioned. And also that some people who might have been in business before, not everybody will go with a classification, because some people will say, okay, well, now I'm ready to move up to the different business type. I'm going to go to a sole, French incorporated business, sole, Earl, SAS, or I'm going to go for a sole trader on the Real Simplifié. In that case, the cap on turnover doesn't apply. So but it's something you prepare for, because it's a major shift in terms of tax regimes and bookkeeping. So you prepare for that's the key thing. So Katie, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is about settling down in France. Have you managed to settle down at all after this roller coaster of buying the property, preparing for a visa application, moving house, preparing for the Atout France qualification, and now I guess preparing for the summer season because your guests are arriving?
Well, let's just say it's been 6 months and it's been a real roller coaster. I'm really kind of still stunned that we're here. We've actually just had our first guest, which was wonderful, and they left feedback, and I didn't have to drug them to make them say nice things to me. But yeah, no, we're fine. We're starting to make friends, both French and English, which is really nice. We've already had our first French invite, which I've heard is incredibly rare.
Right? Yeah. It's like your full story. It's first your first story about Atout France, and it's your first invite to apéro.
Yeah. So yeah, we're finally settling in, and actually for the first time the focus on the Gîtes all the time. This is the first period we've had that. We're now finally starting to focus more on the house and on us as well, which is good. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster.
I suppose, especially for someone who came from the UK, before Brexit, it was so much easier because of the visa. Now, because of the change of rules in the Gite and Airbnb, that's another level of complexity. So I say it's still definitely possible to move to France with a holiday or retreat business, but you have to be well prepared. You don't second guess. As you say, when you start digging, you say, I'm going to add this and that. And then without realizing, you've added some things which are regulated, which you can't. So we have to take the time to do it properly, match the rules, prepare for the right tax regime, and also present it, because there's a way as presenting it for the business visa to get yes. And once you're here, you might slow down and adjust it later on and move to something different. Thank you so much, Katie, for taking the time to share your story with us.
I just add one thing.
Yeah.
You'd asked me earlier about what advice you would
Yes.
give someone embarking on this kind of journey. I suppose the main thing I would say, if you want to do this, that's fine. Please, please, please do your homework. Okay, it is not like what you see on TV. It's going to be a very stressful period. And also plan. So I tend to be a bit more sort of slow. Steve was the one who had this huge master plan on his computer of what we were doing when. One thing we didn't factor in on time scale, and I really recommend everyone does this, is give yourself a month for unforeseen circumstances, because we didn't and we paid for it. Shortly after arriving in France, I decided that I was going to test the French healthcare system and ended up with pneumonia. So I got hauled into Bergerac Hospital. But the problem was we hadn't factored in one of us getting ill. And it happens a lot. You know, this is going to be one of the most stressful things to do in your life. Somebody is going to, get ill. And it was me. And it put our timeline back by a couple of months. So instead of having a nice kind of relaxing period to settle in, we have been on the go non-stop.
Yeah.
So you can still move to France easily. You can start a Gîte business and you can prepare and plan, but do your homework.
As you said, doing your homework and giving yourself a time scale that realistic. Yes, you might want to be here in 4 months, but you're going to suffer. 6 months to save, 7 months might be better because you're going to plan it more smoothly. You'll have time to rest a bit before doing more, or not put so much pressure on yourself. That's definitely a very good point to be made, is like give yourself some grace. There's no hurry. And I see also, for instance, for people coming from the US, whenever you go through a business visa application, you get used to, okay, you understand the system. You have to do something very rigid. You justify everything. And once you land in France, I had a call with someone this week. Well, I've done a business. What's next? Where do we stand? What do they say? Slow down. Just enjoy your French lifestyle in Biarritz. Just hang on for months. Don't do it. Get your first customer. Work with your customer. Work with them. Forget the admin. Just enjoy the fact that now you're here.
Yeah.
And
you know, that's such a good piece of advice. I suddenly realized this will annoy you. But after I need a business plan, but after I got pneumonia, I looked at the plan and basically threw it out the window. And I suddenly, don't do that, by the way, don't do
You
that.
need it next year when you renew your visa,
Yeah.
Katie.
But I suddenly realised I wasn't going to meet what I'd said in the first year. It's no fault of my own, but also I hadn't spent the time to just stop and enjoy. You know, we are in one of the beautiful regions in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And you've chosen France because you want a different way of life. So stop and enjoy it. Like Valerie said, don't worry about all the business admin. It wasn't until I got ill that I said, do you know what? None of that matters. I've suddenly discovered, instead of chasing after the French government, I'm letting the French government
Coming
chase
to
after.
you. Knock.
And once I did that, suddenly all the paperwork started coming through. Once I ignored the French government, it was like, oh, we'll see about this. And now everything's arriving. So stop and smell the roses. You've come to France for a reason. It's fun. Enjoy it.
Well, I think we'll end on this beautiful message. That's the one we want to remember. So, Katie, thank you so much for sharing your
Thanks,
experience. It's been really interesting, I think, packed with information for anyone who wants to go through the same journey as you. Yes, it's feasible. Just take your time and you will hopefully find a property as beautiful as Kate and Steve did. So, thank you so much for joining me today,
Valerie.
Katie. Et à bientôt. Bonne journée à tous.
Bientôt, mon
Merci, au
ami.
revoir.